Hey there, thanks for tuning in to another episode. Today's hot topic is going to be about what to eat before a fast. We've talked a lot about how to break a fast, what to eat in your eating window after a fast, and even about what we can include during a fast. But we haven't talked a lot about what to eat and what to focus on prior to, in particular, a longer fast. So, first, it's important to define what I mean by a fast, right? So basically, a fast is anytime you're not eating. So when you're sleeping, you're fasting. When you are going hours in between your meals, you are fasting. So I'm going to be emphasizing and talking more about what to fuel yourself on if you plan to do a longer fast. Now, a lot of people listening to this podcast are intermittent fasters, meaning that most days they're fasting about 14 to 18 hours, maybe up to 20 hours, maybe even some 24-hour fasts, maybe some longer fasts. But a lot of you are intermittent fasters where 16 to 18 hours, maybe 14 hours is pretty typical. And I would encourage you, if you're brand new listening to this and, fasting seems a little bit intimidating and you don't know, how to really dive in, I would encourage you to start with a 12-hour fast. Start there. That's where I start all my students who are in my courses who are brand new to this lifestyle. We start by getting snacks out. We start by not eating after that dinner meal any longer, and then slowly maybe pushing back that time where you're eating in the morning. But for some people, fasting throughout the evening works better than fasting throughout the morning. There are podcast episodes on that. But for this particular episode, I am going to talk about how to fuel for a fast more than like 22 to 24 hours. And why I'm focusing on that length of a fast is because that is around the time where you have burned through all of your glycogen stores and you're starting to really tap into body fat, burning stored body fat. So let's review what happens when we're fasting and how we go through our fuel. So first, when we first stop eating a meal, of course, we're going to be fueling off of that meal that we just ate. And a lot of it depends on how big it was, what your macronutrient ratio was. If you ate a ton of carbohydrates, you're going to be sugar burning or using glucose for fuel a lot longer than if you had higher protein and higher fat. So a lot of it depends on how big your meal is and then what that macronutrient breakdown is. But that meal can last you anywhere from 2 hours if it wasn't a big meal and was really high in carbohydrate, and you tend to burn through that more quickly, all the way up to 6, 7, or even 8 hours. If you had a higher fat consumption and a higher protein consumption and you ate a big filling meal, and believe me, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But there's often times where I eat a high protein, high fat meal, and I'm not thinking about food until 5 or 6 hours later. So we first fuel off of our last meal, then we start to burn through our glycogen stores. And glycogen stores are carbohydrate storage. So we store glycogen or glucose in the form of glycogen in our muscle tissue and in our liver. And so again, it's dependent on how big your meal was, if you were, or if you're like constantly snacking in between meals. And if you're eating a ton of sugar and carbohydrates, processed foods, and high carb foods, you are going to have more glycogen storage to burn through than somebody who eats lower carb or ketogenic or doesn't snack, and you're not adding in constant carbohydrate fuel to, increase those glycogen stores. And then there's a process called gluconeogenesis where your body will convert circulating protein if it doesn't need it in its amino acid pool. And I've talked about that amino acid pool in past episodes as well. Like, we need to eat enough protein to maintain a healthy amino acid pool so that we have amino acids and protein to build hormones and replenish any new tissue, new muscle, any growth that's happening in our body, neurotransmitters. We need those amino acids to build things in our body, which is why I talk about that macronutrient being so important. But if you have extra circulating protein, your body might convert that over to carbohydrate, but it doesn't like to fuel on protein. So that's usually a pretty limited amount of fuel that you're using. And then once you burn through the glycogen and any gluconeogenesis has occurred, then we're moving on to body fat. That's where the magic is happening. That's why I know there is so much around the area of fasting and intermittent fasting right now. And, I knew that this would happen because it's gotten so popular and it's starting to be villainized and demonized. More so than it has in past years. I've definitely noticed this. And a lot of it is because it's said that intermittent fasting ruins hormones. And if you're female, you shouldn't fast. Or if you have hormonal issues or inflammation, it can make it worse. And it can. I will say that. I'm not going to say that intermittent fasting and fasting protocols are for everyone, but I think it gets demonized and villainized a lot more than it should, because ultimately fasting, intermittent fasting are low inflammation lifestyle habits that help to bring down inflammation overall in the body, gives your digestive system a break, lets your body replenish and rebuild other things because it's not having to digest all the time. So yes, we can go about fasting and intermittent fasting protocols in the incorrect way, and we can go about nutrition in the wrong way. I think that's more of the problem than anything else. Not so much that we shouldn't ever be fasting or we can't ever fast throughout the morning. I hear that more and more now too. It's like, oh, I have to eat within the hour that I wake up. And in some circumstances, like if you have really bad thyroid issues or cortisol issues, that may serve you better. But for many of us with blood sugar dysregulation and really high blood sugars in the morning, we don't really have much of a problem fasting throughout the morning because our body's busy burning off that extra sugar, which is why our blood sugar is higher, so your body's working really hard to burn that out. So intermittent fasting is getting demonized a lot. So I've done lots of podcasts and episodes on this topic, but you need to pick the fasting protocol that works for you. And if you overfast and not fuel properly, not eating enough protein when you come off of your fast, under eating calories, not getting enough nutrition, not eating enough overall after you fast, that is where the problem comes in. And that's where a lot of hormonal issues can be exacerbated and worsened if you're not careful. So a lot of it, I think, in my opinion, from the clients that I've worked with, a lot of it is the refueling that is the problem. It's not so much the intermittent fasting, it's the refueling and improper nutrition and overall caloric deficit. And I see, a lot of people like influencers and quote unquote professionals on Instagram saying, this is why I never have my clients fast. And, it's wrecking their female hormones and it's just a calorie deficit. Like, no, I am not in a calorie deficit myself. Like, if you follow me on Instagram, you know what I'm eating at my meals. It's not a small amount. Like when I refuel, especially my first meal coming off the fast, you know that is substantial fuel to last me all day long. Okay. So a lot of it is just not knowing how to properly fuel when you come off the fast. That's when the problem comes in. And so these people who are saying that intermittent fasting is just calorie deficit, for some people, it might be. And for some people at the beginning, that might be true because they were eating all the time. And all of a sudden they're eating in a smaller window. They're not eating as often. Maybe it is a calorie deficit compared to what they were overeating before. But overall, once you get used to this lifestyle, I would say it's like most people aren't in a calorie deficit all the time, right? They're fueling themselves properly and in a way that balances their blood sugar. So let's get back to the topic. I know I kind of went off a little bit there, but let's talk about what to fuel your body with before a longer fast and what makes sense. And let's clear up some of the confusion around this, because let's look at even how you, like, if you know, I want to do a 24-hour fast, or I want to do like a 36 to 42-hour fast once a week. The 36 to 42-hour fasting considered to be in the therapeutic range. So after about hour 20, insulin really starts to come down, right? Like we are almost through our glycogen stores for just about everybody. We've burned through that energy. And so our insulin levels really start to fall, and we start to push into fat metabolism and stored body fat. And so that's why longer fasts, once in a while, I'm not promoting them every day by any means, or even, several days a week, but maybe once a week, twice a week. These can be game changing to reverse insulin resistance and really bring down that level of insulin overall. So that happens at about hour 20. So 24 hours of fasting, a couple days a week, is a therapeutic protocol. I really love to see my students who are very insulin resistant do a 36 to 42-hour fast, which is an overnight fast, once a week, maybe twice a week. I don't push them more than twice a week. I don't want them to overdo fasting. So once a week, twice a week, and then intermittent fasting, at least 2 meals, if not 3, on the other days that they are not fasting. That's essential to get the proper nourishment that they need after a longer fast. So that's what I'm talking about when we are looking at what to fuel on. So a lot of times you'll see out there like, oh, you should eat a lot of fruit, or just eat vegetables, just eat broccoli and chicken for a couple of days prior to your fast, and that's going to fuel you. Or you see, eat a lot of protein and eat a lot of fiber. The fiber is going to help you fuel because it takes longer to digest, and it's going to, help fuel your fast, which, when we stop and think about it, yes, higher fiber foods take a bit longer to digest, but not as long as high protein foods and high fat foods. So yeah, fiber is important. It's important for our gut microbiome. But when we think about what fiber is, we don't absorb that as humans, right? It's basically just roughage that passes through the human digestive tract without being absorbed. And so our microbiome is what really benefits from the fiber. So to think about fiber fueling us doesn't really make sense because we're not absorbing it as humans. So we can kind of discount that. And I'm not saying that fiber is not helpful for everyday eating and that it can't help you to fuel your fast. But if you see a regimen that says eat a ton of fiber prior to a long fast, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And a high carb approach, even if you're eating like all fruits and vegetables, like say you had a couple of, big salads the day before you went on a longer fast, and you had, dried beans, and you had some chia seeds, and all these fruits and vegetables. Maybe you had some high fiber bread or something like that. It was really high carb, high fiber, but not a lot of protein and fat. A lot of times people say, yeah, let's eat a lot of carbs. Again, that's usually going to backfire on you because for the reasons I just went over, what I just reviewed, how we burn through our fuel. So we go through our meal that we ate, then we go through our glycogen store. So if you ate really high carb for the last couple of days, probably you're going to be hungry because your insulin's going to be higher and you don't have a lot of protein and fat for satiety, but you also have full glycogen stores. Remember, glycogen is a finite amount in your body. You can only store a finite amount, and then you start converting carbohydrates to fat. Okay, so let's say you maxed out your glycogen stores, you have as much glucose stored in your body as possible. First of all, you're probably going to feel a little bloated because it's just extra water. Carbohydrate, of course, has water molecules attached to it. So if you're full of glycogen, chances are you're going to feel a little heavier and bloated than you normally do. And this is actually the exact opposite of what you want to do, because then it's going to take you that much longer to burn through all of those glycogen stores. And remember, you burn through that before you start burning stored body fat. So why would you want to eat high carb for days before your fast? And another way to look at this, like I tell my students who I work with in my courses, if, they're always like, oh, I went on vacation and I went off the rails, like I was doing so well and now I don't know what to do, or I had, it was the holidays. And I always say, do a fat fast for a couple of days. Don't worry about fasting hours or, like not eating for 20 hours. A lot of times people kind of go off the rails, or they're on vacation and they come back and they feel like crap and they're bloated because their body's full of carbohydrates, but they want to just jump into a fast and do like a 24-hour fast or this long fast. But it can be really hard because your body's got to burn through all of that carbohydrate first before you start getting to the good stuff. And so I shouldn't say the good stuff. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using carbohydrate for fuel. It's just you need to know what your goals are. And if your goals are to burn extra body fat, you don't want to eat tons of carbs all the time. So I tell them to do a fat fast where they are focusing on maybe 5 or 6 high fat foods that are pretty much mostly fat. So maybe it's tuna or eggs or avocado or bacon or some greens with coconut oil. The greens aren't going to have fat in it, but if you saute them in some coconut oil or some other oil or butter, just eat those foods for a couple days, and that is it. Let your body burn out your glycogen stores, but you're not uncomfortable because you're not having to fast without food. You're doing a fat fast. So that's going to help you to bring down those insulin levels, get your body used to burning fat for fuel again, even though it's not stored body fat, right? Because we're eating a lot of fat throughout the course of the day, your body's going to use that first because it's in the bloodstream. Remember, you utilize whatever food you eat first. And then once that's done, then you move on to glycogen stores for fuel. And then you're going to go to stored body fat. Okay. So bringing down the insulin levels is critical to be comfortable. I don't want to say unsuccessful, because you can do a long fast. Like you could come off the standard American diet of 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrate a day and be maxed out in your glycogen stores and do a long fast. You can do it. Your body's going to figure out what to do, right? It's not going to like shut down on you. You have body fat there. It's just probably going to be pretty uncomfortable doing it, and you're not going to feel good. You're probably going to get hangry and tired and feel that energy plummet and not feel well during a fast when your body's having to transition from carb burning to fat burning. And so we can ease our body into this. And that's where this whole, lesson and topic comes in. So we don't want to do really high carb. That's actually kind of counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve during a longer fast. It's just going to keep you in glucose burning longer, and your body's not going to start looking for a different source of energy because there's so much carbohydrate there. And you might hear like you need to like drink all this water before a fast, like the week before, drink tons and tons of water. And again, you can't store up extra water, right? It's not like your body's going to take 5 pounds of water and just store it in your abdomen. Like it's not going to do that. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense either, but I will talk about including electrolytes during a longer fast to make the fast a lot more comfortable and successful for you. So when we're fasting, when we do a longer fast, all of the chemical reactions are still happening in our body, right? We're just not digesting food. That's the main thing. It's like we take the food digestion away, but our body still needs to do everything else. Your heart needs to pump, your liver needs to detoxify, you need to build new tissues and hormones and all kinds of whatever needs to be prepared. Like that does not stop, right? And that is what the vast majority of the energy that your body needs is still taking place, minus the food digestion. So we still need to fuel. Your body still needs to fuel, right? Even though it doesn't have any food coming in. And again, this is the beauty of 20 hours plus of fasting. Usually around 22 to 24 hours is where most people have transitioned to body fat. Your body knows what to do. It has fuel stored. And so all these reactions have to keep going on. You still need to live. It's not like you go into a fasted state and you just lay on the couch and do nothing. Like you're still doing your everyday stuff and your body's still using all that fuel. So that's where the fat, like the burning of fat metabolism, really comes in. And so if you're what we called fat adapted or metabolically flexible, this is going to be a lot more comfortable of a transition than if you're not. So that's when I was talking about people coming off the standard American diet being very uncomfortable going into intermittent fasting. It can be really, really challenging for them because their body's not fat adapted yet. And if you eat a lot of carbohydrates all the time, even if they're healthy carbs, your body's just not burning fat a whole lot. Okay, so we need to prepare the body to burn fat. And how do we do this? Well, we eat high fat, high protein, or moderate fat, high protein. Okay, because that's what your body's doing in a fasted state. So after about 24 hours, you're primarily burning fat for fuel. And it's interesting to look at triglycerides. That's what you are burning after about 24 hours are triglycerides. And if we look at the structure of triglycerides, it has a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids attached. So we're breaking down stored triglycerides. And when we break down the triglycerides, we get a glycerol backbone and 3 fatty acids. So your body's able to burn the fatty acid as fuel. And then the really beautiful part is that those glycerol backbones, if you combine 2 glycerol backbones together, you have 6 carbon molecules. And I know that this is like some of you are probably like, what the heck? I don't really care about organic chemistry. Honestly, I remember learning about this in college and thinking, oh, like kind of glazing over and not realizing exactly what was happening. But now I find it fascinating. So if we can combine 2 glycerol backbones, that will give us 6 carbons, and that produces a glucose molecule. And so it's interesting because people think, well, I'm burning fat, and you are, but those glycerol backbones, when you break the triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerols, the glycerol molecules can combine and form a glucose molecule. And so you're mainly burning fat in a fasted state, about 95%, but you're also burning about 5% carbohydrate, which is interesting because you're not taking any carbohydrate in, right? And you've gone through those glycogen stores. Because those glycerol backbones can combine, you can feed your body with a little bit of carbohydrate. There's only a few cells in the body that have to have carbohydrate in order to function properly. Primarily burning fat, but just how everything breaks down, you do get some carbohydrate too. So it's interesting to think about because it's like, I always thought you're just burning fat, but you have those glycerol backbones there as well. And then you do burn just a tiny bit of protein, about 1% in that whole gluconeogenesis reaction, but growth hormone increases so much during a fast. I mean, it's like 400 to 600%, something crazy like that. Growth hormone increases so much during your fast that you're protected from breaking down muscle tissue and protein that you need in the body. So that's why your body's just basically pushed into fat metabolism. And your muscle mass is not utilized it's protected. And so we have to remember too, I've said this over and over before in other podcasts, when we look at what we lose on an intermittent fasting during some longer fast, you're going to lose some lean tissue, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's muscle mass. So lean tissue is anything other than body fat, right? So that's water weight. That is extra tissue that your body's breaking down in a fasted state that's no longer needed. It's maybe old viruses and old bacteria and things that your body's just kind of cleaning out. So it's not necessarily muscle mass. So keep that in mind. So in closing, what we want to do is eat close to that 95%. We want to stay closer to that fat burning metabolism so that when your body transitions over to it, it's not such a shock to the system. You don't feel it so much. So basically everything that I teach you here on the podcast, what I teach you on my Instagram page, what I teach you in my courses, if you are a student of mine, we go really in depth on all of this. But we want to do moderate protein or moderate to high protein. I like to do higher protein for weight loss because that protects your muscle mass even further. And then make sure we're getting enough fat, moderate to high fat, and low carbohydrate the days leading up to a longer fast so that your body's not shocked by it when you go into it. So I always say, like, for women, at least 100 grams of protein a day. Target that. Make sure to keep targeting that prior to your longer fast. Get at least 2, maybe 3 sources of fat in your meals and keep it lower in carbohydrate. Then when you go to your longer fast, you won't have so much glycogen to burn through, and your body will just be naturally burning fat and transition to stored body fat a lot easier. So the last thing to remember is to make sure you're getting electrolytes and staying properly hydrated. This makes fasting a whole lot easier, longer fasts especially. Remember so there's a couple things happening that make it really easy to dehydrate during a fast. Once you're dehydrated, and you get dehydrated, you're kind of to the point of no return, and it's really hard to hydrate without eating. You don't want to get to that point. And I've worked, this has happened to a lot of my students just because they're new at this and haven't done longer fasts before. And they're not properly hydrating and adding electrolyte and trace minerals. And they dehydrate, they get a headache, they don't feel good. They're only, maybe 20, 22 hours in. They wanted to do a 36 to 42 hour fast, but they didn't hydrate properly. And now they're just behind. It's really hard to catch up. So from the time that you start your longer fast, so from that last meal, say you want to do a 36 to 42 hour fast, right away, start hydrating and adding electrolytes to your water or coffee or tea. I like to drink decaf tea. I put salt in with my tea every morning, and I also add trace minerals. There are a couple different versions of trace minerals that you can get. I have no affiliation with these companies, but inside my courses with my students have access to my Fullscript account, which is a huge database of supplements. And I recommend to them either a product called 40,000 volts. I believe you might be able to get it on Amazon as well, or keto drops. Both of those have trace minerals in them. And then I also add salt. So I'm getting the sodium, I'm getting the potassium, I'm getting the magnesium, but then I'm also getting the trace minerals. And when you're fasting, the reason why it's important is because you're not taking food in, right? So you're breaking down your glycogen. When you break down your glycogen, you flush out water that was stored in the form of carbohydrates. So that's one reason why you get more dehydrated. The second reason being when our insulin levels fall, and insulin levels are going to fall while you're fasting because that is the most strategic thing that you can do to lower your insulin because you're not eating. So your insulin levels are going to come down. So when your insulin levels drop, that signals to the kidneys, to get rid of water. And anytime your body's flushing water, it's going to flush electrolytes with it. And so we have the carbohydrates breaking down, plus we have the insulin dropping. Both of those things cause the bodies to flush extra fluids, and then you're losing electrolytes with it because electrolytes follow water. So you need to replenish. You can, put salt under your tongue or add electrolytes to your drink throughout your fast, and then add in the trace minerals in too. Now be careful, there are some electrolytes that are sweetened, and I would encourage you to leave those for when you are in your eating window time, because even though they might be sweetened with stevia and they're not going to cause a glucose response, they may be bumping up your insulin, and your body's perceiving that as something sweet, and it might be counteractive to reducing your insulin levels and reversing your insulin resistance. So I hope that helps. But again, you don't want to just drink water during a longer fast. You want to get the electrolytes. You want to get those trace minerals. So again, the products were called 40,000 volts or keto drops. They're both made by Trace Minerals. So I hope that this helped. So I think a lot of people are afraid of longer fasts, or they think that they can't do them. The things that I talked about today, eating higher fat, higher protein, keeping those carbs limited the days leading up to a fast. And then I didn't talk about this, but if you're a menstruating woman, you don't want to do these longer fasts the week prior to your period. That's not a good time to try to do longer fasts. It's going to be challenging with the progesterone higher, and you're working against your hormones instead of with them. So wait until you get your period, maybe a few days into your period or that week after before you ovulate. Those are the best times to do longer fasts, and it makes it a whole lot easier if you're keeping your carbohydrates lowered and using electrolytes with your fast. So hope you learned a lot. I'll see you back again next week.